Okay, start the slideshow. So today I've been fasting for about 9 days and about 10 days, 9 days and 23 hours. And I'm going to talk a little bit about fasting and what I think the benefits are before I get into how I'm going to break my fast today. So just a disclaimer, I am a PhD, I'm not an MD. I've done a pretty deep dive on fasting. I think it's really good. I mean, the usual disclaimer, you should talk to your doctor. Unfortunately, I have met very few doctors who would endorse fasting, even though there's a really long history of people fasting for religious and other reasons. Doctors tend to not endorse it. So that's just my disclaimer here. Take it with what you will. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, first, evolutionary reasons. Everything makes sense to me in light of evolution, and you see many different animals fasting for long periods of time. And you also see that if an animal gets an injury, they, like a big cat, they'll crawl into a cave or a sheltered area, and then they won't eat and sometimes won't drink for some period of time. And it does seem like not eating and sometimes not drinking turns on a kind of maintenance mode for the body, where things start to happen that are different than the growth mode that we're usually in. And this is all going to be significantly simplified because I'm not an expert on fasting. But I do think that there's good evolutionary reasons to expect that there would be different physiological processes, maybe important physiological processes, that can't happen except for in the absence of food. And I also think it's a strange thing to think that we will keep a consistent body weight throughout our lives, or that we can maintain a certain set weight. I think that's pretty difficult to do, and it also doesn't really make sense. Pretty much all animals, grizzly bears, all these animals that hibernate, and squirrels and birds, they gain a lot of weight, they lose a lot of weight, and they do that in order to function during the mating season or during winter. And another thing that's, I think, unusual that we think about in the current day and age is, fasting is, fat is not for decoration. Breasts and butts, like, there's secondary sexual characteristics on women that are made of fat that are attractive, but generally our visceral fat, our abdominal fat, that stuff's not an advertisement to others. That doesn't help us. It just basically is provisioning. We are wearing food on our bodies, and to me it makes sense to occasionally use that food that we are wearing rather than not. So another way that I think about fasting is like this jack pine. So this is a species where the cones only open up and seed when they are exposed to fire, where the resin melts. And you can see this is a really good example of an unpleasant process, a negative process that actually catalyzes something good, which is seeding for the next generation. And finally, I think this has been called the mismatch hypothesis. It's got various different names, but we live in a very, very unusual environment compared to the sort of more natural environment that our hunter-gatherers lived in. And this includes things like lots of fatty food, unlimited access to meat and sugar and stress. These kinds of things are all unusual for us, especially chronic stress. And so I do think that fasting can help mitigate some of the kinds of diseases of civilization that people get, and that people in the developing world, or hunter-gatherers, or other people who live in a more, what you might call, natural, primal way, do not get. So these are just all my somewhat speculations, but I'm going to talk about things fairly simply here because I am not an expert on fasting, and this is kind of how I think about it. I've done deep dives on fasting, but I am definitely not an expert. So one really good reason why, you might think, like, if you want to improve your health, why don't you just eat less? Well, there's pretty good evidence that caloric restriction rather than fasting, like eating 0 calories, is harder. And this is one example from the Minnesota starvation experiment, where they gave these men 3,500 calories, something like that, for some period of time, and then they gave them less than 1,500 calories for a long period of time. And this study was trying to see the effects of starvation. This is around, I think, World War II or World War I. And what they found is that the men who were given very few calories actually were fantasizing about food all the time. They were stealing food out of the garbage. They were hoarding chewing gum and swallowing it. They were really obsessed with food. And when you see somebody like, this is, I think, Angus Barbieri, who is a good case study, he didn't eat for over a year. You can see here that he had a lot of food he was wearing, and he didn't eat for over a year. He just took multivitamins, and he stopped. He didn't have a problem with it. He wasn't sneaking food or anything, as far as I know. And he's the good case study about how this kind of obesity can be mitigated by fasting. And another good example that's more modern is this guy on YouTube who I really like. He's called the Fasting Fat Man. And I actually don't know his real name, but he did a 6-month long fast. Then he was eating 1 meal a day. I think he was keto. And then now he, again, is doing another long fast. And he makes a really good point in this particular video where he says that something like 2% of people who get gastric bypass end up dying. And the most recent study that I saw in PLOS ONE showed a study of obesity where they fasted people, and only 1% of them had adverse effects. So my speculation is that it's probably safer for somebody who is significantly, has this metabolic syndrome, like this guy did. It's probably easier for him and safer to fast than it is to have a gastric bypass. And this is a quote from Upton Sinclair. This is a very good video. I think it's from What I Learned. Several people have asked me if it would not be better for them to eat very lightly instead of fasting, or to content themselves with fasts of 2 or 3 days at frequent intervals. My reply to that is that I find it very much harder to do that, because all the trouble in the fast occurs during the first 2 or 3 days. It is during those days that you are hungry. And that's the general consensus, is that the first 2 days really suck. And when people tell me I could never fast, I think what they're assuming is that the fasting gets worse and worse as time goes on, that you get more and more hungry. But actually, right now, last night my housemate made some melted brie for his dinner, and I just wanted to smell it. And it didn't make me hungry. I was just appreciative of food smells. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And usually they say to break your fast when you're hungry. I'm actually not that hungry yet, but I do want to go back to the world of the eating. I haven't really felt hungry since 4 or 5 days ago. So why do I fast? I fast so I don't have to count calories or eat limited portions. I'm kind of an all or nothing kind of person when it comes to food. I'm vegan, obviously, but or I'm mostly vegan, but it is difficult for me to just not eat until I'm full. To eat just a small amount. That's what I usually do. Is I usually eat 2 meals a day, and then I do a feeding window restriction. So what I usually do is I have breakfast and lunch, and I skip dinner, which is bad because dinner tends to be the most social meal. And one reason why I fasted now is because I was visiting family, and they just look at you like you have 3 heads if you don't want to eat dinner. The other thing is that fasting gets me back to the weight that I prefer. So I tend to prefer to be around 115 pounds. And this is basically, I had gotten up to I think around 122, visiting family and everybody. And so I do prefer to be a lighter weight, and fasting gets me back there very easily. It makes my skin really nice. This is kind of a superficial reason, attractiveness reason, but I do think that there's something going on there. And I also think it's a bad thing to be a slave to hunger. So it's just terrible to always be worrying about, where you're going to eat next and what your next meal is going to be. And when you eat 1 meal a day or you fast, skipping a meal is no big deal. And I think that's really important. And finally, it also makes me sharper when I'm actually hungry. And I think the evidence is pretty preliminary, but I do think that it makes a lot of sense that fasting would make you less likely to get diseases of civilization. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Hold on, let me just close a window that's taking up a lot of RAM. There we go. Okay. Cool. So, what are some possible benefits of fasting? Well, one is that it probably improves your insulin sensitivity. So, one of the things that happens as we get older, and certainly the more sugar you eat, is that you become insensitive to insulin and you have to produce more and more. And that's partly why people get diabetes. It also improves your, decreases your insulin-like growth factor. I'll show you a picture in a minute, but insulin-like growth factor is associated with cancer and heart disease as well. There's some evidence that it involves immune regeneration. So one thing is that when your body has to use its own reserves in order to fuel itself, then it starts to clean up cells that are potentially misbehaving. So that can be immune cells that are old. It can also be cells that are precancerous. And there's mixed evidence for this, but as you'll find out, if you do a deep dive on this stuff, most of it is in animal models. But I do think that those animal models are probably a good indicator of what happens in humans. So Valter Longo, who I'll talk about in a minute, has done a lot of studies about this in particular. So yeah, that's autophagy. And autophagy happens starting around like day 3, and that's where your body starts to clean up these old cells. As I said, you go from growth mode to maintenance mode, and maintenance mode means that you're getting rid of cells in the body that aren't working properly. Obviously, weight loss, some people don't want to lose weight. It's actually pretty easy to gain weight again after a fast if you just go back to eating normally. As you'll see today, even though I'm vegan, I'm going to try to do a kind of keto vegan diet for a while because I know I'm in ketosis now. It's pretty hard to be in ketosis when you're vegan, and I want to prolong that ketosis so that I don't gain everything I lost back right away. Reduced hunger symptoms, which as I said before, and there is some evidence now that it makes your neurons more resistant to stress, or it can result in neurogenesis, that is, building new connections in the brain. So these are all benefits. Some of them have more evidence than others, but for my part, I'm willing to kind of endure the difficulty of fasting because of these benefits, and because I actually just enjoy long periods of time where I don't have to think about food. Stuff that sucks on prolonged fasts. This was me last week. I was having such a rough time. I felt cold, and you could feel lightheaded, dizzy, and tired. I have incredibly low blood pressure. My blood pressure is like 90/60 anyway, and so when I fast, I have to be careful to take my electrolytes. I'll talk about that in a second, because I will get lightheaded. But I do stuff. I did an exercise class. I did yoga many days. I go for walks. You just want to kind of make sure your exercise is gentle. I've also never fainted in my life, so we'll see. Sometimes you will feel a little bit faint. In the first few days, you will sometimes feel sad and anxious. Even I am pretty chipper usually, and there will be days that I feel sad and anxious, and you'll be hangry. You'll be irritable in the first couple days. You might miss out on gatherings around food. I'm at the point now where I've been fasting so long that I can watch people eat, and it's no big deal. And other people think you're crazy. This is like, there's some admiring people, but there's definitely people who think that you are, proto-anorexic, or that you have serious kinds of mental problems if you fast, because it's such an unusual thing to do nowadays. So certainly there's a very mixed bag in terms of what people think about you when you do really long, prolonged fasts. If you do intermittent fasting or 2-5, which is, not eating 2 days a week, people generally think that that's okay. Yeah. So there's different stages of fasting. If you download this Life Tracker app, which I'll show it to you now, it actually says that you are in stages faster than you are. But yeah, I don't know if you can see. Yeah, you can. That's the Life Tracker app. And it says that you're in ketosis, I think 6 or 10 hours in, which is probably not true. But so day 1, you're using up your glucose. If you've done shorter fasts before, you'll feel pretty okay. Day 2 and 3, so your liver stores something called glycogen. So your first energy reserve is your glucose. Your second energy reserve is the glycogen in your liver. And that's what you'll use next. And then you'll start to feel pretty bad. You'll feel hungry. You'll want to be eating. And yeah, it's terrible. And day 3 onwards, usually you tend to start to feel better. For me, it's around day 3. And this fast, I didn't actually record my ketones and my glucose and stuff, but I did a fast with a couple of friends, and we all used a glucose monitor, and we used ketone urine strips, and then we were really tracking exactly what was going on. So I don't do that. I might buy a ketone and glucose monitor at some point. I know what my weight is, and I know how I felt. And you can kind of tell when you start to go into ketosis, because you get that funny taste in your mouth. And Simland, who I'll talk about later, has got some good indicators of whether or not you're in ketosis that are not from a glucose ketone indicator. So some fasting tips if you want to try it is you want to start with time restricted eating and then work yourself up to a 24-hour fast, not a day fast. You definitely don't want to just jump into a long fast unless you've really got nothing else to do. There are resorts and places in Thailand and Mexico and other places where you can go and be under a doctor's supervision and just not eat. Tim Ferriss did something like that, and he said that they didn't let him exercise. So I do think that that can be a problem, because of muscle wastage or whatever. You're not going to feel super energetic for 2 to 3 days. You might want to just relax. I like to watch Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares because it shows him eating food that's terrible and spitting it out. And I'm like, see, food's no big deal. Food's not good anyway. So yeah. If you're going to fast and work like a regular 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, you might want to be on day 3 when you start up or take a sick day. Smelling food is definitely going to make you hungry, especially the first 2 days. You will feel sad and anxious, as I said. There are periods of euphoria. Like I just feel really blissed out in a way that it's hard to describe, just light and joyous, around the latter days. Just for no reason. I think I was just in the car in the sun. Just amazing feelings. Caffeine could make you jittery. So if you're a coffee person, definitely have coffee without any cream. As I said, no calories and no artificial sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners, especially, don't chew gum. Those things tell your body there's food coming, and then you're lying to your body. So don't do that. It'll just make you hungrier. Theanine is the compound in green tea that keeps the caffeine from making you feel jittery. I haven't had a coffee in like 2 weeks, so you might want to consider that. I've been drinking green tea or jasmine tea about a couple times a day since I've been on this fast. Remember to take your electrolytes. There's this totally insane person who advocates something called snake juice diet, and he has this mixture of electrolytes he uses. It's, I think, 1 part pink Himalayan sea salt to 2 parts potassium, you can find that in no salt, to 1 part magnesium to 2 parts baking soda. And so I put that in this little bowl, and that's basically, if I feel lightheaded or I feel bad, I'll take that. I'll take a half a teaspoonful in my tea, and then I'll chase it with some water. You definitely want to chase it with water because the potassium is not good for your stomach if you just let it sit there, but it will alleviate your symptoms. Again, Simland, who is linked in this description, he has got a really good blog about what to do in terms of, what you're missing in terms of electrolytes. Another good thing to do is that you can absorb magnesium through your skin. So you can take an Epsom salt bath and that often makes me feel better as well. So these are some other people you can learn from who know way more than me. I'm just somebody who fasts a couple times a year. This is Valter Longo right here. And here he is with these people. I can't remember what disorder they have, but they have a disorder. They're obviously very little, as I am. Short people tend to live longer as well. But they have they don't make IGF-1, which is a compound that's also reduced when you fast. And these people, they smoke, they drink, they eat fatty food, and they don't get cancer and they don't get heart disease, which is pretty amazing. So he thinks that's because of their lack of IGF-1. This is Jason Fung. He says your body has 2 fuel sources, food stored and foods. Anyway, I can't read it. But anyway, the fuel sources that you eat and then also the food that you're storing on your body. And of course, you're switching between them. You're going to be eating the food on your body. And Jason Fung has got some great lectures on YouTube as well, if you want just an introduction. This is Simland. He is here measuring his blood glucose and his ketones on a 5-day fast. He's written a book that I have not read. I think it's called Metabolic Autophagy. I always pronounce it differently. But he is really good, and he also does interviews with people and about fasting as well. And he's keto, and as I explained, I can't really be keto because I'm vegan. It's pretty difficult. But I did buy a keto vegan cookbook, so we'll see how long that lasts. I don't think it really makes sense. I don't need to be keto all the time because when I fast, I'm keto basically. This is Mindy Pelt's. If I was going to be a credentialist, I would say she's got a chiropractor degree, but she's great. She knows tons about fasting. She does really good videos, and she made this very helpful chart that she talks about as well here about the number of days that you're at and the kind of benefits that you might be getting from fasting then. She's a big advocate of fasting. I think she talks about dry fasting too. Another really good thing to think about is there's a fasting science Reddit and there's just a fasting Reddit, and there's a lot of FAQs and stuff on there as well. And then this is Rhonda Patrick, and she does great interviews with people. She's done interviews with Valter Longo and other people as well about fasting. And she's really well known because she's been on Joe Rogan. She's has a really quite a amazing knowledge about stuff. And that's me. Oh yeah, so I'm wearing the same blouse. I just got this picture taken. So this is me on the left. I'm holding on to John Stossel. That's name dropping for you. I was just this past week came out a video where I'm talking about sex differences. But it's not a huge difference. For me, 8 pounds is a big difference. This is actually more like 10. So I went from 121, 122 to around 111. And everything just fits better. I can do yoga poses that I couldn't do because my tummy's not in the way. I actually, don't mind being heavier, but it's really nice to be this weight again. And I'm going to be traveling. So it's nice to also not think so much about what I eat. And I just go between these weights quite a bit. But I'm only like maybe 5'1". So 10 pounds on me is quite a big difference. And the last time I had unfortunately I can't check my body fat. But the last time I had it checked, I think I was around 24%, which is pretty normal for a woman. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be breaking my fast with today. This is, I've never had this before, but I do like parsley. I actually never have green smoothies either, but I'll be drinking this parsley, ginger, lime, cucumber, and cashew mixture. And it's good because it has a lot of good nutrients in it, and the cashews will sweeten it up just a teeny bit. So yeah, I'm excited. We'll see how much room I have. I might not be able to eat very much, but what I intend to do, if I have time, we'll see. I only have an hour till we go live, is make a flax meal tortilla, but I might just eat an avocado without it, honestly. And then this is some yogurt. That's nutmeg, it's not mold. This is some coconut yogurt that I made. You just take some coconut milk, you put in 2 probiotic capsules, you seal it up with some cheesecloth, and then 2 days later you have coconut yogurt, which is pretty cool if you ask me. So I'll be eating this stuff for you guys, and mostly for me. And yeah, all right, now on to live stream.